In the neighborhoods of Ventura County, California, one name carried a quiet, dangerous weight: El Evil. Martin Madrigal Cazares wasn't a street soldier anymore. He was the man people whispered about, a phantom who made entire gangs kneel. To many, he seemed untouchable. To others, he was the embodiment of La M's shadow, the unseen hand of the Mexican Mafia stretching from prison walls to suburban streets. His power didn't begin in Mexico. It began in the prison yards of California. Madrigal learned early that real authority inside didn't come from muscles or tattoos. It came from obedience and fear. Behind bars, La M, the Mexican Mafia, ran everything. They taxed drug deals, ordered hits, and controlled life in the yard. Madrigal, ambitious and cold-minded, adapted quickly. He watched how the older carnals used respect and violence as tools of control. By the time he was released, he understood that leadership in this world meant being both invisible and inevitable. Ventura County was the perfect place for him to build that empire. Local gangs like the Colonia Chicas already operated there, selling methamphetamine and heroin in tightly guarded territories. But the Mexican Mafia demanded tribute from all who profited. Madrigal was their enforcer, the tax collector of La Ime. He didn't need to shout his orders. His reputation did it for him. Street gangs paid him a percentage of every sale, every deal, every robbery that touched narcotics money. It was called the Mafia tax, and anyone who questioned it soon vanished or was found beaten, bloodied, or worse. Madrigal built his network through intimidation and business sense. He didn't waste time on petty crime. He understood that drugs were the true economy of power. The Mexican Mafia trusted him because he kept the money flowing upward. In return, he gained protection and prestige. From prison blocks to back alleys, his name became synonymous with fear and profit. He controlled who sold what, where, and at what price. His orders rippled through entire neighborhoods, enforced by men who never met him, but owed him everything. By the early 2000s, law enforcement began to notice a pattern. Drug routes in Ventura County pointed to a single, unseen organizer. Phone intercepts, coded letters, and informant statements all hinted at a man coordinating from the shadows. Agents described him as methodical, detached, and smart. He knew the system, the surveillance, the way to vanish just before the raid. He wasn't reckless, he was calculating. But even the most disciplined gangster can't escape forever. In 2006, after serving a 77-month federal sentence for illegally re-entering the United States, Madrigal was deported to Mexico. For most, deportation would mark the end, but for El Evil, it was the beginning of a new chapter. When the plane touched down across the border, Madrigal didn't see exile. He saw opportunity. Mexico was chaos, but chaos was fertile ground. The border wasn't a barrier, it was leverage. From there, he could oversee drug shipments moving north while avoiding direct exposure to U.S. law enforcement. In Mexico, he began to rebuild, linking up with cartel suppliers who controlled routes through Baja California. His California network remained intact. His orders came through intermediaries, encrypted phones, and coded messages. He was hundreds of miles away. Yet his influence in Ventura only grew stronger. He demanded taxes from gangs that had never even seen his face. He made deals with distributors who believed they were buying directly from La Im's upper ranks. And through it all, Madrigal stayed hidden, a ghost who ruled through fear, money, and myth. By 2010, law enforcement realized that Madrigal's reach didn't end at the border. He had become a new kind of gang lord, one who didn't need to be present to be powerful. He lived in Mexico, but operated in California, bridging the worlds of prison, street, and cartel. Agents began calling him the ventriloquist of Ventura, a man who pulled strings from afar. But Madrigal's strength came at a price. His rise had drawn attention not just from law enforcement, but from rivals inside La M itself. To some, he was a loyal soldier. To others, he was too ambitious, too independent. The organization tolerated confidence, but never ego. Inside the ranks of La M, arrogance could be fatal. Still, from his new base in Baja California, Madrigal ignored the warnings. He lived like a boss, moving between safe houses, surrounded by armed guards. He believed he was beyond reach, beyond punishment. Yet even in exile, the seeds of his downfall had already been planted. From across the border in Baja California, Martin El Evil Madrigal lived like a man who had conquered two worlds. He wasn't hiding, he was commanding. In Rosarito and Ensenada, where the Pacific breeze met cartel territory, Madrigal lived among killers, traffickers, and fugitives like himself. To the untrained eye, he blended in with the many exiles who had fled U.S. law enforcement. But beneath that calm surface, he was orchestrating a transnational criminal network, one that stretched from Mexico's dusty border towns to the low-income neighborhoods of Ventura County. His methods were disciplined. He knew that the Mexican Mafia's influence depended on communication. Using prepaid burner phones and coded language, Madrigal spoke to his lieutenants across the border, directing operations with precision. His men collected taxes from local gangs, enforced rules, and ensured drug profits flowed upward. Each call he made could mean life or death for someone in California. The power was intoxicating, the kind of control that few had ever achieved from outside prison walls. In Ventura County, his shadow was everywhere. The Colonia Cheeks gang, among others, continued to pay tribute to him, funneling drug proceeds through intermediaries. They didn't need to see Madrigal to know he was still in charge. Every meth deal, every street corner sale carried a piece of his authority. And when problems arose, when a dealer tried to shortchange or a rival gang tested the limits, Madrigal's orders were clear. Make an example. Fear kept his system stable. But as his reach expanded, so did the risks. From the safety of Baja California, Madrigal wasn't just dealing with La M anymore. He was negotiating with cartels, men who dealt in tons, not ounces, and who didn't respect anyone outside their circle. Still, he believed he could manage them. He saw the cartels as business partners, not threats. They supplied the product. He controlled the retail pipeline into California. For a while, it worked flawlessly. The drugs flowed north, the money flowed south, and Madrigal grew richer than ever. Yet his success began to distort his sense of loyalty. He started acting as if La M itself depended on him. In the eyes of his fellow Mexican Mafia members, that was dangerous thinking. The organization's foundation was built on respect for the hierarchy, for the rules, and for the men who had bled to maintain them. Madrigal's growing independence was seen as arrogance, even betrayal. Inside La M, whispers began circulating. Some claimed that El Evil was pocketing money meant for the organization. Others accused him of using La M's name to secure cartel protection and increase his personal profits. In the Mafia's code, that was one of the worst offenses imaginable. To claim the organization's name while enriching yourself was to put yourself above La M. And no one, not even a high-ranking figure like Madrigal, could survive that kind of accusation for long. Still, from his compound in Mexico, Madrigal seemed unconcerned. He was convinced that his distance made him untouchable. To law enforcement, he was just another fugitive beyond U.S. jurisdiction. To his enemies, he was still an asset. Money, after all, buys time in the criminal world, but time is always borrowed. The friction between Madrigal and other Mexican Mafia members finally spilled into the open. A letter surfaced, obtained later by the Los Angeles Times, written by another high-ranking Laim figure. In it, Madrigal was rebuked for his overreach, accused of abusing his authority, disrespecting other members, and violating the organization's core principles. The tone was cold and deliberate, the kind of message that often came before a death sentence. The letter warned him to remember his place, to stop acting like a king. But Madrigal didn't listen. Instead, he doubled down. His arrogance grew alongside his paranoia. He began to isolate himself, surrounding his life in Mexico with bodyguards and loyalists. Those close to him said he was becoming suspicious, even hostile. He trusted no one, not his cartel contacts, not his Laim brothers, not even some of his own lieutenants. The same authority that had once made him powerful was now making him paranoid. His relationship with the cartels was deteriorating as well. To them, Madrigal was becoming unpredictable. He demanded respect that only cartel bosses were owed. And when he failed to deliver shipments or payments on time, arguments turned violent. The cartels valued business over ego, and Madrigal's pride was beginning to cost them money. Despite these cracks, he still projected the image of power. He attended gatherings of lower-level traffickers, spoke as if he were Laim's ambassador in Mexico, and continued directing extortion rackets in Ventura County. Even from hundreds of miles away, he issued orders that resulted in beatings and killings. But those who had once feared him were beginning to sense weakness. His voice on the phone no longer carried the same certainty. His network, once tightly organized, began to splinter under the weight of internal distrust. Meanwhile, U.S. authorities were closing in. Federal prosecutors had been building cases linking Madrigal to major drug operations in Ventura County. He was wanted for conspiracy, narcotics trafficking, and racketeering, crimes that could have put him away for life if he were extradited. An indictment in federal court named him among several top Mexican mafia figures coordinating cross-border operations. But extradition never happened. Twice, Madrigal was detained by Mexican authorities, and twice, he was released under mysterious circumstances. Each time, he returned to the streets within weeks, his freedom bought through influence, connections, or corruption. His survival only reinforced his sense of invincibility. He bragged that he could walk out of any jail in Mexico, and for a while, that was true. In reality, though, his empire was weakening. Every arrest, every release chipped away at his credibility. The men who once swore loyalty to him began questioning whether his luck was running out. The cartels saw him as a liability, a man too exposed, too loud, too full of pride. Inside Laim, members whispered that his behavior was attracting too much attention from law enforcement and the media. For an organization that thrived in secrecy, that was the ultimate sin. By the end of 2022, El Evo was still technically in command, but his empire was rotting from within. The calls from California came less frequently. Some of his most trusted lieutenants had been arrested or killed. Those who remained loyal did so out of fear, not respect. Madrigal's name still carried power, but his voice no longer inspired obedience, only caution. He had built his kingdom on control, but the cracks were showing. And in the underworld, once control slips, death is never far behind. By early 2023, the walls around Martin Eleville Madrigal were closing in. The man who once commanded a cross-border empire now found himself surrounded by distrust, investigation, and betrayal. His enemies were no longer just rival gangs or law enforcement. They were the very people he once called brothers. His arrogance had finally caught up with him. And in the Mexican underworld, pride is a dangerous luxury. In January of that year, his world was shaken when Mexican authorities raided a residence in Rosarito, Baja California. Acting on intelligence shared by U.S. agencies, the operation was swift and coordinated. Inside the compound, officers found military-grade weapons, assault rifles, tactical vests, and ammunition stacked in crates. Among those detained was Madrigal himself. For law enforcement, it was a long-awaited moment. After years of chasing his ghost across borders, they finally had him in custody. To the Ventura County Sheriff's Office and the DEA, it looked like the beginning of the end. With Madrigal arrested, they hoped the Mexican government would finally approve his extradition to the United States. There, he would face multiple indictments on drug trafficking and racketeering charges. Prosecutors described him as a major transnational threat, a fugitive who had orchestrated violence and narcotics operations from the safety of another country. But the celebration was short-lived. Within weeks, Madrigal was released, under circumstances that even now remain murky. Official reports were vague, citing procedural inconsistencies and jurisdictional complications. Off the record, sources whispered what everyone already suspected. Bribes had changed hands, favors were exchanged, and El Evil walked free once again. To the world of organized crime, his release confirmed what many already believed, that Madrigal was untouchable. When he emerged from custody, he was furious. The arrest had humiliated him, damaged his image of control, and shaken his fragile alliances. He blamed everyone, law enforcement, rival Mafia members, even his own men. In private, he vowed revenge. But something had shifted. The network that once followed his every order was now fragmented. His cartel contacts were hesitant to deal with him. His lieutenants were being hunted by both U.S. and Mexican authorities. The empire that once operated like a machine now sputtered in chaos. Inside La M, his troubles were seen as weakness. The organization prided itself on strength and silence, two things Madrigal no longer embodied. He had become noisy, erratic, and visible. For the Mexican Mafia, visibility is a death sentence. The leadership in California's prisons began to question his loyalty and competence. Some whispered that he was losing control, others that he was jeopardizing the entire organization's relationships with the cartels. The consensus grew clear. El Evil had become a liability. Meanwhile, cartel leaders were also losing patience. To them, Madrigal was no longer a valuable partner, but a potential problem. He had drawn too much attention to their operations, inviting unwanted scrutiny from U.S. agencies. In their world, that was unforgivable. The cartels valued discretion above all else. They didn't care how long someone had worked with them. If a partner became too loud or too hot, they were erased. As weeks turned into months, Madrigal's paranoia deepened. He began moving between safe houses in Baja California, never sleeping in the same place twice. Those who saw him during those final months described a man constantly on edge, restless, suspicious, and agitated. He had stopped trusting nearly everyone. He no longer met people face to face unless absolutely necessary. Even his own bodyguards were rotated constantly. He feared they might be bought off or ordered to betray him. In Ventura County, investigators noticed something strange. The once steady stream of communications between Madrigal and his U.S.-based contacts had almost completely stopped. The tax collections were faltering. Some gangs stopped paying altogether, believing he could no longer enforce his threats. The Colonia Cheeks, long under his thumb, began quietly shifting their loyalties toward other La M figures who still had influence within California prisons. Madrigal's control was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. For years, he had built his power on the illusion of distance, that he could rule Ventura County while living comfortably in Mexico. But now that distance worked against him. His orders carried less weight. His authority depended on reputation, and reputation depends on fear. Once people stopped fearing him, everything he had built began to collapse. As his influence eroded, his enemies multiplied. Some were rival La M factions looking to take his place. Others were cartel operatives, tired of his arrogance. And still others were law enforcement officers on both sides of the border, determined to finish what they started. The pressure came from all directions, and for the first time, El Evil had nowhere to run. In August 2023, sources in Baja reported unusual movements around Madrigal's circle. Meetings were being arranged, contacts were being summoned to discuss business. Some believed he was trying to rebuild alliances, to prove he could still be useful. Others believed he was planning to flee deeper into Mexico, away from Baja's volatile criminal networks. But before he could make his next move, fate, or vengeance, caught up with him. In September 2023, news began circulating through law enforcement channels. El Evil was dead. The details were scarce. According to initial reports, he had been shot and killed somewhere in Baja California. No one claimed responsibility. No arrests were made. The murder wasn't even widely reported in Mexican media. In a country where killings were routine, his death was just another statistic. But for investigators who had chased him for years, the message was clear. Someone had decided Madrigal's time was up. Was it the cartels, settling a debt or silencing a liability? Was it the Mexican Mafia, enforcing its own brutal code of discipline? Or was it an inside betrayal, a friend turned executioner for money or survival? No one knew for certain. But within the underworld, no one was surprised. Everyone who rises too fast in La M eventually falls, and those who defy its structure rarely live long enough to explain themselves. When word of his death reached California prisons, the reaction was mixed. Some inmates expressed relief, others feigned respect. There were no tears, no memorials, no songs in his honor. In the Mexican Mafia, men die the way they live, without ceremony, without sympathy. Their stories fade as new names rise to replace them. Madrigal had been powerful, yes, but he was not irreplaceable. Law enforcement on both sides of the border confirmed his killing, but offered little else. His body was never publicly identified, and no autopsy details were released. Some claimed he was shot multiple times. Others said it was a single execution-style bullet to the head. The truth, like much of his life, disappeared into silence. And so the man who once ruled Ventura County from across the border met his end alone in the same shadowy world he had built. A world where trust is currency, betrayal is business, and death is the only certainty. When Martin Elevil Madrigal Cazares died in Baja California in September 2023, the world barely noticed. There were no headlines, no official statements, no public funerals. His death passed like a whisper. Just another body in a land desensitized to blood. Yet for those who had lived under his rule, in the neighborhoods of Ventura County and the corridors of California's prisons, his fall marked the end of an era defined by control, fear, and the silent power of the Mexican Mafia's reach. In the months that followed, U.S. law enforcement confirmed what many already suspected. Madrigal's killing was the final act of a man who had played every side and lost. He had courted the cartels, defied La M's hierarchy, and believed that distance equaled safety. But in the criminal world, distance is just another illusion. Whether behind bars or across the border, the reach of the Mexican Mafia is endless, and for those who betray its code, death is inevitable. It's only a matter of who delivers it first. Still, Madrigal's impact didn't vanish with him. The system he built, the one that connected prison politics with street-level violence and international trafficking, remained intact. His taxation model continued, now overseen by others who had waited patiently for his fall. Gangs in Ventura County still paid tribute, but the money now flowed to different names. The hierarchy adjusted, the machine continued, and Laim's influence never wavered. In that sense, Madrigal's death wasn't a collapse. It was a recalibration. The empire he once ruled simply changed hands. For investigators, his story became a case study in evolution, how modern organized crime no longer requires proximity. From his home in Mexico, Madrigal proved that one man could direct gang operations hundreds of miles away, using nothing more than phones, coded messages, and fear. His reign demonstrated that the Mexican Mafia had adapted to a new era, an era where leadership didn't depend on being inside prison walls, but on the ability to connect those walls to the world outside. Yet beneath the surface of strategy and control lay a more human truth. Madrigal's downfall was rooted in ego. His arrogance made him believe he could outthink the cartels, outmaneuver the police, and outrank his own brothers in La M.E. But power built on ego always cracks. Inside La M, humility isn't a virtue, it's survival. The organization has no kings, no heroes, no martyrs. Everyone serves the structure. And when someone forgets that, the structure erases them. Those who knew him, or claimed to, described Madrigal as both brilliant and brutal. He understood money, logistics, and fear better than most, but he also loved control more than loyalty. He was the kind of leader who saw people as pieces to be moved, not partners to be trusted. In the end, the very traits that made him powerful also made him alone. When the bullets came, there was no army left to protect him, only silence. His story also reflected a larger reality, the blurred lines between the Mexican Mafia and Mexico's drug cartels. For years, the two worlds had operated in parallel, one ruling prisons, the other ruling territories. But men like Madrigal merged them, creating hybrid empires that transcended borders. They brought cartel-scale supply chains into the hands of prison-based networks, creating a criminal infrastructure that law enforcement still struggles to dismantle. Madrigal was both a symptom and an architect of that evolution. Even in death, his name circulated quietly through California's prison yards. Older members of La M used him as a lesson, a warning about the cost of arrogance. Younger inmates, those dreaming of power, were told his story as a reminder that La M always outlasts the individual. The message was simple. You can serve La M, but you can never be La M. In Ventura County, the effects of his reign still linger. The drug routes he helped organize remain active. The violence he fueled continues in cycles, passed from one generation to the next. Law enforcement agencies still monitor the same neighborhoods, chasing the same ghosts. The faces change, the methods evolve, but the structure remains, a shadow government of crime, built on fear and loyalty, sustained by silence. For the agents who spent years tracking him, Madrigal's death brought no satisfaction. There was no conviction, no courtroom justice, no moment of closure. Just an ending written in gunfire on foreign soil. One DEA agent later admitted, "We wanted to bring him back, put him in a cell, and show that even the untouchable can fall. But in that world, justice is rarely clean. It's usually just survival." In the underworld, stories like Madrigal's always end the same way, in betrayal or in blood. The only question is how long it takes. Some men fade quietly, others explode in violence. El Abel did both. He rose through silence and fell through arrogance, leaving behind a legacy built on control and destroyed by ego. By 2024, new names had already replaced his in both La Aim's communications and cartel dealings. The network adjusted seamlessly. To the organization, he was a memory, one more fallen soldier in a long, bloody lineage. But to those who studied his rise and fall, his story carried a message about the future of organized crime, that borders no longer matter, that power can be exercised from anywhere, and that even the most feared men can vanish without a trace. In the end, the man called El Evil became what he always wanted to be, a legend whispered in fear. But legends, like empires, fade. His name may live on in rumors and stories, but the truth of his life, the manipulation, the paranoia, the endless violence, stands as a mirror to the system that created him. He was not the first to fall, and he will not be the last. Mexican Mafia endures because it is not built on individuals, but on the machinery of control. Madrigal believed he could rule that machine. Instead, he became another cog crushed beneath it. And so the story of Martin Madrigal Cazares ends where it began, in the shadows. A man who thought he could master both sides of the border, only to be devoured by the very empire he tried to command. His death was quiet, but his lesson is eternal. In the world of La M, power doesn't make you safe. It just marks the moment they start watching for your fall.